Good afternoon everyone and welcome to the Governance and Audit and Standards Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Ian Holder, Chair of this committee. I'd like to draw your attention to the following. Housekeeping safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Do not attempt to use... That's on it twice. Please assemble at the turning circle at the end of King Henry Street past the University's car park building. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, if you signed into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. Live web streaming. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. Can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak, then off again once you've finished speaking. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Please can I ask members and officers to introduce themselves, starting to my left.
Hello, I'm Helen Dickerson, Deputy Monitoring Officer.
Good evening, I'm Richard Adair, Councillor for Nelson Ward.
Councillor Stuart Brown, Fratton Ward.
Councillor Judith Smythe, St Jude Ward.
Councillor Spencer Gardner, Member for Drayton and Farlington.
Councillor Russell Simpson of Hillsey Ward.
Andrew Britton, Audit Partner, Ernst & Young.
David White, External Audit Manager from Ernst & Young.
Kelly Nash from Strategy Unit, Portsmouth City Council.
Richard Locke, Assistant Director of Procurement, Portsmouth City Council.
Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance.
Helen Clem, Finance Manager.
Steve Belshaw, Group Accountant, Technical Financial Planning Team.
James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Thank you everyone. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. There are no apologies been received. I think it's a full house. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare in respect of the items to be considered at this meeting? Nothing? Thank you. On to agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of October 2024. Have members read the minutes and are they happy that I signed the previous minutes as an accurate record? Good, thank you. Right. On to agenda item 4, the External Audit Completion Report for those charged with governance, year ended 31st of March 2023. That's in the agenda supplement. Andrew Britton, Partner, and David White, Senior Manager, are in attendance to introduce the report. Andrew, David, is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
I'll take the report as read, but a couple of items I'd just like to highlight, if that's okay, Chair. So just as a bit of background to the report for the benefit of members, this is the long-awaited outcome made possible by government legislation enacted on the 30th of September and by the National Audit Office's new audit code enacted on the 14th of November to reset in relation to open audits for years 22, 23 and earlier. So just to highlight for members, within the report we have completed the following in relation to 22-23. The value for money section, which is section 5, this report summarises and is consistent with the report that we presented to the committee back in July and concludes from value for money conclusion perspective. There are no significant weaknesses to bring to the attention of the committee identified in that interim report or up to including today. In terms of the financial statements, we have performed the minimum procedures required under the international standards of auditing to be able to move to a disclaimed audit opinion in line with the legislation I just referred to, so statutory instrument 907, and these mainly relate to audit risk and planning and materiality, which is outlined in section 2, and our updating of understanding of the business and the risk of fraud through inquiries with management, those charged with governance, and internal audit. In terms of the reason for the disclaimer, the background as to why we were not able to perform an audit on 22-23 is set out on page 7 of our report, page 9 of the pack. and we therefore move to disclaim our opinion to adhere to the government legislation, which, as I said, was recently passed and provides a backstop date of the 13th of December. The opinion for our wording is in section 4 and is consistent with the reasons given on the summary of the on page 9 of the packs. In terms of next steps, obviously the following agenda item is the approval of the 22-23 accounts by the committee, and then the provision of a letter of representation in relation to the 22-23 year. Happy to pause there, Chair, and take any questions.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? Microphone, Judith.
Well, we're on item, the external audit completion report, aren't we? Yeah. I have got a few things to mention, Chair. People may know that I've been on a lot of audit committees in my time, particularly within the NHS, and I do find it completely unacceptable that we've got that what we're looking at is the audit for 22-23, not 23-24. In the old days, we used to get the audit for now we would have been getting the draft audit for 23-24, and that would enable us, quite rightly, to take into account the recommendations of an internal audit, external audit, doesn't matter, whatever audits there were, which would have then informed our creation of the budget next year. And we're not able to do that for another year because of what's happening with external audit. Now, I would just like to I'll end with a question, but I'd just like to ask you to look at the 4 sections of the report in, with your eyes peeled back. A lot of this report is standard stuff that Ernst & Young will have been using all over the country in the other audits they're doing. It's a lot of it describing what they would have done and what they could have done, and really relatively little of this report is to do with the actual audit results of the audit for Portsmouth. There's quite a lot of it that's about what we're planning to do, what we should be doing, if you look at it carefully, there is, and I think therefore it's not representing very good value for money for us. I understand some of the reasons for that, but I'd just like to go through a couple of things. We're going to have a disclaimed audit report, which means it's not completely useful to us. I think the work that has been done and has been reported in what I call section 3 of this is useful, and thank you very much for it, and it does give us a clean bill of health in general terms. So that isn't something I want to draw attention to. But I do think it's unacceptable for us as the chief governors of audit and standards within the council to just accept a disclaimed audit report as if it was an everyday thing. And I want us to come towards a firm agreement with Ernst & Young about what they're actually doing about it and how we're going to get ourselves out of this mess. It's kind of not good enough, really. Just moving on, the fact is, if you look at the main reasons, this is on page 9 of the report, big page 9. The main reasons for the council financial statements not being audited and signed to date include the post-pandemic timelines. I really cannot buy that. We apparently entered into this contract with Ernst & Young last year. We're in year 1 of the contract. Is that not the case? I've been told that it was. What year are we?
22-23 is the final year of the previous contract.
Oh, it is it? Okay. Have we entered into a contract with you for next year?
You don't enter into a contract with us. You enter you opt into the PSAA's regime, and they appoint auditors nationally for each individual authority.
Okay. Do we get a chance to say we don't want you if we don't?
You are consulted on who your appointed auditor is.
There wasn't a personal comment, you understand?
No, I don't take it as such.
Good. Okay, so we're in year 5 of a 5-year contract, so your references to COVID, I will concede, are relevant. Nevertheless, by the time you get to year 5, when it was it was actually in 2020 COVID, I think it's an excuse that is being overused. We also, you talked about new technical matters. I presume you would have kept a contingency open for those new technical matters to be considered. It's not a matter of extra expenditure in a lot of contracts. And I know that you draw attention to the valuation of property assets being a new and important piece of work that took a lot more resource. Did you manage to do any of that work?
So as we outlined in the report, we completed the 21-22 audit, which was encompassing all of the things that you've mentioned above.
Yes.
We completed that in January 24.
Yes, which is, I noted that. It's a bit late, isn't it, really?
Well, obviously...
it says so here. The 21-22 audit was therefore included in January 2024. It's slipping out. I mean, I've made this comment before in this room when I was on GASC before, and the results are worse this year than they were when I made those comments. And certainly in the NHS, we used to keep a very close eye on what the auditors were actually giving us. Let me just go a little bit further on this. I've just highlighted various things. I don't want to bore you all too much. I've made the essential point. You know, a lot of this first section, work plan, it's all very interesting, but the work plan is what you approve at the beginning. It's not what you need to repeat in a report at vast cost. The significance and other risk areas is useful. Note that it's all about no change and so forth. Let me just go to the substantive page that I want to draw attention to. Excuse me a second, Chair. The report about us, where it does become useful, is when it's on the grey pages here, on page 22, 23, and I found that useful and reassuring. So, then we get on to the kind of ironically named value for money part of it, because I don't feel that our external audit is actually this year very good value for money, but you don't identify significant risks or weaknesses except what you've done there. I'm just moving on. I've marked up my copy. So you do say at the end of page 33, based on the work performed, which of course is what you have to do, the Council had our proper arrangements in place in 22-23, that's 18 months ago, to enable it to use information about its costs and improve performance to improve the way it manages and delivers its service. So that's good. I'm reassured by that. The management representative letter, which normally we get at this stage to look at, is actually just a template with gaps in it, and you say management will tailor this and send it back. Again, too late, and why are we paying to have a template that you're giving to other authorities you're using? It's not something we should have paid more than tuppence halfpenny for. Then the second thing, we've got quite a lot of that report that doesn't actually say anything, and then we got on to page 39, which is quite a lot more interesting, really. But what it does show on this page is that the fee. I mean, obviously, you're explaining here that the disclaimed opinion means that we don't have any testing of the opening balances. So the risk to us is potentially enormous. In fact, I would say it was extremely huge if we didn't trust our internal staff and our internal finance team pretty highly, I think, here. But if I was sitting here and not trusting them, I would be extremely worried, because if you get the input figure wrong at the beginning and you're working on the wrong assumptions, you're going to multiply the problems by the end of the year through a good audit. Financial reporting, you do talk about the fees for those years being based on there's somewhere in this report, and it may be not in this page, that you mention the fact that I think it may be a theoretical mention that us failing to give you information is a risk, and I think that is still kind of mentioned in this, and I would like to ask you a question about whether we did fail to give you information, whether it was your delays that are really at the root of this. So that's the first question put down. The other thing is that the this disclaimed opinion does put us at risk, and we need to acknowledge that in our minutes. And it also implies that there will be some kind of refund to us for work not done. Now, I guess that must be described by the PSA, I don't know what it is, but it's implied on page 39 if you've all read that closely. So the second question there about how are you going to maintain your own business model if you're well behind, have got to therefore do last year's work and this year's in parallel to get ahead and get up to date again. whilst you have put up the fees quite considerable, they are gone up to three, but nevertheless we're still faced with a big delay. And I just wonder if in the framework contract, the contracts we've got that have been put together by the PPSA, is that right? PPSA? No, PSSA. PSAA, thank you, there you are. I thought that didn't sound quite right. And, you know, I take it they're acting in the public interest, not just in the interests of the people on the framework. But you have got extra money coming in, and I would think that would be a reason for using resources more efficiently. You do say that one of the reasons that you're delayed is that you didn't have the staff and the competencies. I don't think when we have a contract with somebody that is our concern. It isn't our concern. I've run a lot of large building contracts, for example, and I know it's hard on people, but the fact of the matter is I'm paying to get the job done. I'm not paying for excuses about you not having people to do the job. And if it's to do with your business model and the need for, perhaps, for, I don't know, people at the top to take lower salaries or whatever it is, that's what I would count as good value for money. So I just want to move on to the absolute, I mean, I'm regarding this very seriously, and I think we'd be silly not to. We have not got the reassurance we've paid for and that we want to have. So my question then, at the end of that, is when will the 2023-24 year be audited, and we can have a full report of that?
Okay.
Yes, please. If the chair's happy with that.
Yeah. So the decision to disclaim the 22-23 audit was taken in response to the Minister's announcement under the previous government in July 2023, reaffirmed and by the new government over the summer this year, which inserted a backstop date for the 22-23 audit in the 13th of December. The same piece of legislation that I referred to that was passed on the 30th of September then also inserted a backstop date for 23-24 as the 28th of February 2025. Knowing that that was the proposed course of action for the government, previous and current, we took the difficult decision to move as instructed by the Minister to the most recent year of audit. So to answer your question, we are and have been doing for a while the 23-24 audit. Obviously, until the 22-23 audit is complete, we cannot complete the 23-24 audit. Therefore, we will intend to, and we're talking with officers this afternoon, we will bring our final results report to the to February the 5th gas meeting and conclude our 23-24 audit at that point. So it's a function of the reset and recovery process that the government has put in place. To your point around, therefore, the business model going forwards, absolutely the decision that we took to move to 23-24 being the most recent year of audit, and therefore by implication the most useful to stakeholders, was taken in the full knowledge that we have the capability to do that by disclaiming the earlier years audits, which I understand, I appreciate is not the situation that any of us wanted to be in, but it is a function of the way the government has chosen to resolve the national problem that you referred to.
But I mean, just to draw attention to the obvious, if you're putting more resources into the later, into the audit that you should be concentrating on now, which is the 23-24 audit, then do you have enough resources to do that and to complete the earlier audit? And if that's going to be compounded by some kind of reduction in fees for the work you didn't manage to do before, how on earth are you going to keep going? Is there a huge crisis in your whole sector, or is a different business model required?
So no to that last question. We are suitably resourced for the new contract that started with the 23-24 year and the commitment we have to the public sector, both in local government and in health and in higher education. We have no concerns about our ability to complete the 23-24 audit collectively across our portfolio where we are getting the points that you picked out from PSA's statement of responsibilities, where we're getting the cooperation from audited bodies. The reason, as I said, that we're moving to 23-24 is on the direction of the government's proposals, and the fact that we believe that it's the right thing to do in terms of the most recent year of audit.
Yes, no, I accept that. I think it is a common sense thing to do. But I think it's indicative of a broken market and a broken competition. But that's a different debate from in this room. It's, you know, they've got basically you and the 4 or 5 other consultancies that have the majority in this work have got them over a barrel, really. And I think it's greatly to be regretted that we've got ourselves into this state. That's by the by in many ways. But so we're hearing
Judith,
you.
hang on a second.
I'll finish in a second.
People wanted to reply.
Sorry, Chair, I'd just like that implied that there was collusion and collaboration amongst the accounting and auditing firms, and I'd strongly like to reject that. I don't think that's an appropriate comment.
No, I didn't say that. I said it's a breakdown of competition. I didn't say it was collusion. I said the intermediary body, the PSAA, they're coordinating it. I must take a lot of the blame for this. But yes, I understand the sensitivity of that, had I said it. So you are saying, and we need to minute, that the audit will be ready for us to look at the audit of the 2 years ago will be ready on the 18th of February for us to look at. 23-24. Yes, 23-20. 2 years ago. We're still in 2020. I meant the audit for the. I'm sorry, I've got confused here. The full audit that you're completing now, which is for 22-23. 23-24. Yes, 24-25. Yes.
Sorry. 22-23 is the disclaimed opinion that allows us, under the legislation, to disclaim that year, open year of audit, and move to 23-24. We're disclaiming 22-23 because 21-22, for various reasons, which I don't think it's appropriate to go into now, was not completed until the end of January 24.
No, it wasn't. That's right.
And so, therefore, at that point, knowing where the proposals were going, we took the decision to move from disclaim 22-23, requiring us to do certain things, but then be able to move straight to 23-24 and complete that audit in line with the legislation, which is before the backstop of the 28th of February 2025. Okay. I appreciate the years do get. It does get
28. So, in the 28th of February 25, that's in a couple of months' time, 3 months' time, we will have before us the full audit of the year that finished in March 2024. So we will effectively have caught up. That's an important thing to say. Last question then is what are the actual risks that we face of having the disclaimed accounts that we've been looking at now and that have to be finished by the 13th of December?
So our audit opinion is disclaimed. So I guess that's a question for officers in terms of what they see as the risk.
Maybe that's what is the actual risk that we are faced with now? Can't do much about, but what is the risk?
Can I just clarify in relation to what risk are you referring?
The risk of having a disclaimed account for the year ending 18 months ago.
So in terms of the production of the accounts, they were completed by the finance team and signed off by the Chris Ward Section 151 officer, and we've produced those in line with all of the relevant guidance and legislation that we need to follow. So obviously we haven't got the final external audit opinion on that, but the quality of the accounts, as you know, is something we make sure that we endeavour to ensure is there. So I would see minimal risk because, say, we've done the work in the way that we're required to do. So.
Good, thank you. And I suppose last question, you'd be pleased to hear, is the whole question about whether or not we are happy in the longer term to go on for the first year. I'm not quite sure why anybody awarded the contract with all these difficulties there have been. But the contract has now been awarded the first year in a year of 5 by PSAA. And are we happy with that?
Okay. Where, in relation to other councils, how many other councils are getting disclaimed audits? Is that nationwide?
It's nationwide. I don't know the exact number. It's somewhere between 400 and 500.
So not exactly uncommon. Sorry? Not uncommon then.
No.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, that's just goes what I mean about not enough competition. It's a race to the bottom in that year, isn't it, really? It's one thing being one of 4,500, but we're not here to.
No, but it's not uncommon, and it's a statutory instrument from the government. So I think the government recognise that those audits aren't going to take place fully. So I don't think there's a lot we can do about that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
The risks here.
And members, any other questions? No. So, members, are we happy to note the report and the comments of? I think Judith's comments are going to be recorded. Are we reassured that?
We should say note. I think
I was about to say, are we?
We haven't been through the rest of the report. The point is we are reassured.
Yes, I was about to say, are we reassured that what has been done is are we happy with?
But we have lost some confidence in the external audit because of the huge delays.
Yeah, because of a national problem, not just, it's not a solely Portsmouth issue. I think there's something.
Chair, we've heard at several previous meetings this is a national issue facing the entire industry as a domino knock-on effect from COVID, as a knock-on effect from a lack of resource in the entire industry. I don't think it's safe and fair to say that we've lost faith in the process or faith in our external auditors just because of a national problem that is outside their control.
No, I think we're reassured that what has been done is satisfactory and that shows that there aren't any problems with Portsmouth City Council. Are you reassured with that? Members? Okay, happy. So we'll note that and note that we're reassured.
You had some other speakers here.
Chair, the only thing that I would like to flag is that we haven't had qualified accounts for a considerable period of time, but the risk exposure is that where are you getting your assurance? We all trust our finance colleagues. Trust is not a control, so it's where you're getting your independent verification. That is part of your risk exposure, and I think it would be inappropriate not to flag that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 5, annual governance statement, pages 15 to 42. Kelly Nash, Corporate Performance Manager, is in attendance to introduce the report. Kelly, members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
No, thank you, Chair. The report will be familiar to those who've got some length of service on the committee because we've considered it at regular intervals in the various draft forms. So what is presented is the final annual governance statement of 2023. As set out on the background to the papers, it's a statutory requirement that we provide this document. It sets out how our systems and processes ensure good governance in the organisation and therefore give committee reassurance that our control framework is robust. The report includes the relevant annual opinion from the Chief Internal Auditor and a summary of the key issues that were considered to be points for addressing in 23-24, the production in 22-23. The previous external audit report obviously made reference to the document as well and confirmed that it had been prepared in compliance with regulations and that it chimed with the understanding of the authority. So on that basis, and given that the paper's read, happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you. Members, any questions, comments? Judith?
I think this is, as it always is, a good report. I would like just only to suggest we give it more publicity because it's one of the few reports that we have in the Council that brings everything together. And I think that's important. Also, perhaps a bit of a private joke between me and Kelly Nash is I think it does mention outcomes much more than they used to. Thank you.
Chair, if my might reflect that Councillor Smythe does raise this on a regular basis, and I hope that that is to satisfactory, but I would also say that this should be considered in the basis of the accompanying document, the narrative statement to accounts, which does talk about how the resources allocated in the authority do intend to achieve the outcomes that we set out.
Thank you. Anyone else? Members, it is recommended that the committee agrees the annual governance statement 2022-23 at Appendix 1 to the report. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Brown, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simpson. Is the recommendation agreed, members? Anyone else? Agreed? I think that's agreed then. Thank you. And then we're on to item 6, Statement of Accounts 2022-23. That's pages 43 to 48 in the report. Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance and Resources, and Helen Clem, Finance Manager, are in attendance to introduce the report and answer questions. Members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Thank you, Chair. We have no further updates to this report, if anyone has any questions.
Thank you. Judith? Microphone, Judith.
The statement under paragraph 2.2, I take it we're on that report, yeah. The statement has to be account after the 27th of November 2024. Are you signing it after this meeting?
Yep, that's me.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments, members? I think everyone's happy, thank you. Members, the recommendation is that the statement of accounts be approved and authority be delegated to the Chair of the Governance, Audits and Standards Committee to sign an amended 2022-23 statement of accounts after the 27th of November meeting, should this be required following comments by the Auditor. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Brown, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Adair, thank you. Is that agreed, members? Can we have a show of hands? Agreed. Thank you. Then we're on to item 7, Treasury Management Mid-Year Review 2024-25. It's pages 49 to 60. Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance and Resources, and Helen Clem, Finance Manager, are in attendance to introduce the report and answer questions. Members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Nothing really more to say other than that we're operating within our boundaries and our limits. We've not had any breaches, and we are monitoring our borrowing, and our surplus cash is doing still quite well because of the higher interest rate.
Thank you. Members, any questions or comments? Councillor Brown?
One thing I always look for in this report is what's the borrowing limit and where are we, and good to see that for as we have been for quite a long time, we're still only about 2/3 of our borrowing limit, so quite happy to see that.
Thank you. Judith?
Any particular risks you see to the way that we invest and control our treasury management in the upcoming year, given change of government and everything?
We operate our treasury management and our investment strategy in line with the treasury management strategy that was approved by full council and back in March and reviewed by yourself as a committee prior to that. The way we manage our surplus cash is to invest in security, liquidity, and then focus on yield. So we always make sure that we are prioritising security and liquidity. So I've got no concerns to flag to this committee at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Judith, microphone. Thank you. Where are we? Members, the recommendation is that the Council's Treasury Management activities have remained within the Treasury Management Policy 2024-25 in the period up to 30th of September 2024 be noted, and the actual Treasury Management indicators as at 30th of September 2024 set out in Appendix A be noted. Is that noted, members? Thank you. And are we reassured that things are being run properly?
I think we could
The reassurance. We have reassurance in the finance.
On the future.
Yes. Can we add that? Thank you.
We're not worried about the future.
No.
Future.
We'll add that to the report. Thank you. The minutes. Thank you. Right, on to item 8. Internal Audit Performance Status Report, 4th of November 2024, pages 61 to 78. Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor, and Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor, are in attendance to introduce the report and answer questions. Members have read the report. Is there anything that you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, this is our standard audit progress report that we bring to each committee. We are on course to complete the audit plan to enable us to give our annual audit opinion in July of next year. You'll note that we have some changes to the audit plan, so while our audit plan is agreed annually, we do keep it flexible to meet the risk exposure of the council, so we note down there any changes to the audit plan. And then the rest of the report is the work we've completed since the last meeting, with some summary notes, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions? I noticed there were, in the performance status report, there were a few, particularly in pest control, there were 3 high-risk exceptions. Do we know what's been happening with that and what's...
So we've provided a small summary there as to the areas as to where the high risk came from. The actions were agreed to be implemented by March 25, so we will follow that up in the next audit plan next financial year. So we'll report back to that one in the 25-26 audit plan.
Thank you. Licensing policy was out of date. It was sort of 2016 to 2021. That's quite a way out of date. Do we know how that happened?
No, not off the top of my head, I'm afraid, but I can certainly try and find out for you.
Thank you. Members, any more questions? No? Okay, so members, it's recommended that the Governance and Audits and Standards Committee notes the audit performance for 2024 to 25 to the 4th of November 2024. Is the report noted, members? Okay, thank you. That report's noted.
I think we should be saying we were reassured by the report.
Apart from the pest control.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
That we did draw attention to the areas that needed attention,
And
such as including pest control.
we'll record that for the minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. On to agenda item 9, report of the Independent Remuneration Panel. James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer, is in attendance to introduce the report and answer questions. Members have read the report. Is there anything you particularly wish to draw the committee's attention to?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will, because I'm particularly mindful that the majority of members on this committee won't have seen one of these reports before, so I thought I'd do a slightly more thorough introduction than I would ordinarily do. So the report before members is the report of the Independent Remuneration Panel, which met 5 times during the summer to agree a scope for the review, request evidence, and to form recommendations based upon the evidence. As I've just alluded to, I believe only Councillor Smythe has been sort of seen this process through previously. So the last review was taken took place in early part of 2021. Recommendations, which were for no change at that time, took effect from the 1st of April 2021. So I shall briefly explain why this review has taken place now and why we're considering it. The catchily titled Local Authorities Members' Allowances England Regulations 2003 provide that it is for each local authority to decide its scheme of allowances for members and the amounts to be paid under that scheme. This is a matter for determination by full council. In order to add some independence to the process, councils are required to establish an independent remuneration panel which will provide the local authority with advice on its scheme and the amounts to be paid. In setting or amending a scheme of member allowances, the council must have regard to the recommendations of the independent remuneration panel. Councils are obliged to review their scheme of member allowances annually unless the scheme is index linked. If index linked, which Portsmouth City Council scheme is, the requirement is to review the scheme every 4 years. The logic being that schemes which are index linked are to a degree self-regulating and self-adjusting. This is why the report is considered now to take effect from the 1st of April 2025, 4 years after the existing scheme came into effect. The matter has been considered at this November G&A&S committee and December full council in order that the new scheme can be built into the budget setting process. The role of this committee is to firstly confirm that it is satisfied with the way in which the independent panel undertook the review from a process perspective. Namely, the panel considered 2 sets of benchmarking data, held a meeting with group leaders to seek cross-party views, and formulate its recommendations based upon the evidence that it garnered. Secondly, this committee is to act as the vehicle to forward the matter on to full council for consideration and determination by way of making a recommendation to full council. In respect of the latter, and in order to make the recommendation a little clearer, the committee may believe it beneficial to slightly amend the wording of recommendation 2.21 to read that the City Council considers and agrees rather than decides upon the recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Panel as set out in the panel's report when confirming a scheme of member allowances to take effect from the 2025-26 financial year. If the committee is minded to do that, it would need to be conducted in accordance with Standing Order 41, namely proposed, seconded, put to the chair in writing and circulated to members before being debated on and voted upon. If agreed, this would then form the substantive recommendation on to full council. Doing so would not prohibit any further amendments from being put in the same manner. However, procedurally, this amendment, if put, would be best to come first, as any further amendments that may come forward to modify the actual recommendations of the IRP to go forward to full council would be able to sit under the overall notion that council is being asked to positively agree something rather than consider something, because ultimately council is making a decision on the matter. As a reminder, as a committee, only one amendment may be considered at a time, under Standing Order 42, and under Standing Order 43, any further amendments must be given before the reply to the debate on the first amendment. Ultimately, it's full council which makes a decision, and in doing so, it must pay regard to the report of the IRP, as I've already said. As a decision item at full council, amendments may be tabled at that meeting, proposed, seconded, debated in the usual manner as per any other decision item on the full council agenda. I would suggest that if this committee or full council is minded to agree any amendments to the recommendations, of which it's free to do, it's made clear as to rationale and the reasons as to why it does that. So that's my introduction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. Members, Councillor George Madgwick wishes to speak at this meeting under Standing Order 55. Councillor Madgwick, you've 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to come and speak to the panel members. As you noted, a number of the panel members haven't been here at the last one 4 years ago. So I was part of, obviously, the leaders' briefing, and I just wanted to highlight a few points. And I think that what I would like to see in an ideal world, is this report pushed back to the IRP panel for a reconsideration. So not for anybody here today to make amendments to the structure or the price or the multipliers and so on and so forth, but to highlight a number of, say, concerns or comments and just have another look at it, really. The reasons being is that in the report, obviously, they make a lot of reference to the SEE benchmarking data. And this isn't something that we necessarily considered too much in the group leaders meeting when we were consulted on it, because we were using the CIPFA data to really reference. Now, the SEE benchmarking data isn't overly relevant, and I think in the report that you've been given today, a lot of weight has been put on the SSE benchmarking data, and the reason I don't think it's too relevant is because it only compares local councils who have a completely different structure than ours. They have, some of them have dramatically less population. I mean, some of the councils, Bracknell, for example, has over 100,000 less residents in it and half of the revenue that we have. So it's not really too comparable. Whereas the CIPFA, which is the Chartered Institute that covers all of this, is the more relevant one. They select the 10 comparable councils across the country wide, our closest neighbours, and it even says in the report here that they're our nearest neighbours. And that, in my opinion, is what should be given the greater weight when the Independent Remuneration Panel are making their guidance to the Gas Committee. So I think that, in my opinion, they just need to relook at it with the CIPFA benchmarking data as the more weighted data. And if you do look at that, and if you look through the report, you'll see that Portsmouth City Council is remunerated the lowest on all angles. So we out the 10 CIPFA members that we compared against all the relevant bodies, we rank 10th out of 10th on leader, 10th out of 10th on deputy leader, 10th out of 10th on cabinet members, 10th out of 10th on scrutiny channel payers, 10th out of 10th on opposition. We are the bottom, rock bottom of every single pay award, everything, except from one. But other than that, we are the rock bottom of everyone. And the report even notes that even if you approve the recommendations they're putting forward today, we are still rock bottom of every single one. We're 10 out of 10 on every single one based on the CIPFA data. And if this was a yearly thing, I would say that we could review it every year and look at different things. But this is something we're committing to for 4 years. It's a long-term thing. And I think also what's relevant to note is that the leaders of this council for the last 20 plus years have all had to have supplementary income to be the leaders. Councillor Vernon Jackson openly admits and states that he had chair positions on the LGA boards, which obviously took him away from his role at Portsmouth City Council so that he could afford to be a leader. Councillor Donna Jones, the leader, also took subsidiary positions. Councillor Steve Pitts has openly stated that unless it was for his spouse that he couldn't afford to be leader. And when they asked a number of councillors, there wasn't a single councillor answered the question that said that they could afford to be the leader just on the leader's salary. And I think that is something worth noting. A few other things in the report, just briefly, that I think need to be reconsidered by the panel. And I'm not telling them whether they should pay us more, less, or the same. I just want them to relook at it. Is that they've created a disparity between licensing chair and planning chair by, for the first time ever, not combining their multipliers. So forever, we have always paid the planning chair the same as the licensing chair. And what they haven't done in the report is and I've asked the licensing manager as well, and they didn't ask the licensing manager's opinion. And what they've negated from the report is that although the planning chair has a lot of meetings, recorded meetings and briefings and stuff like that, and a lot more meetings in person than the licensing chair, what they've negated is that the licensing chair has monthly briefings with the taxi trade, the licensed trade. They go on overnight visits to clubs and bars until 2, 3 in the morning. They do a lot of other stuff that hasn't been included within the report. So I think they need to look at that. And I personally feel that whether it goes up or down is irrelevant, but licensing and planning should probably remain the same because they're both regulatory chair positions, and I think it's fair for them to remain the same whatever they are. Also, and I think this is a really thing to note, they asked the group leaders' opinions and councillors' opinions based on the allowances aside from that, so like the carers allowance, so on and so forth. And a suggestion was put forward, which I was quite surprised not to see in this report, because a lot of us councillors will know that some of us are lucky enough to have community centres in our ward that we can use for free for surgeries, but other councillors aren't lucky enough to have those in their wards. I believe Central Southsea, Hillsey, I think there's 4 or 5 of them that don't have a free community space that the council owns in their ward to use. And as group leaders, unanimously, myself, Liberals, Labour and Conservatives all suggested to the chairman of the IRP that we implement a very, very small allowanceable claim, like so say for example £20 a month, that the ward councillors can claim to pay for the hire of a space in wards that don't have free access, because it's unfair for some ward councillors to get free access to provide resident surgeries and other councillors not, to have to pay to hold resident surgeries. So we wanted to kind of add that in to be fair, and I believe, and I think James could probably confirm this, but I think during the meeting it was a very positively taken on board, and I believe that the chairman was going to look at adding it, and it wasn't added, and I don't know why. So I just wanted them to re-look at that as well, and just explain to us why that wasn't added, or whether they could re-look at it. Aside from that, Chair, the only other thing that I'd like to really see is I think it would be fair to give us explanations of why our members are paid 10th out of 10 on all the areas, and if there's a justifiable reason for that, then that's absolutely fine and fair, and I'll happily accept it. But I do want to know the explanation of why they don't feel that we should be pushed slightly up. Is it our performance? Is it, I mean, what are we doing differently or wrong that doesn't allow us an average. I'm not asking for a higher than average or a top level. I just think, why aren't we deserved of an average multiplier? Why are we 10th out of 10th on all angles? So that's all, Chair. As I say, I'm not really going to comment on how much or how little. All I want to do is hopefully get it sent back to the IPR panel just to have a re-look at it with the things I've commented on and have another informed view. And if they come back with the same, they come back with the same. But that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smythe?
I think there's some merit in what's been said, but I was also highlighted the difference between the Chair of Licensing Committee and the Chair of Planning. I would assume they ought to be on the same rate, and I wondered if they were being asked to look at it again, if they could look at that. I can't see any justification for difference. They're both regulatory committees. They both involve quite a lot of expertise, which chairs learn. I just did have a question about that. It's very interesting also to see the difference in the way in which local authorities agree a carer's allowance. I think ours is good on the living wage, but if your child, for example, goes to a nursery and you have to book extra sessions because of council meetings, then you'd have to demonstrate that, because that would be necessary. It says you've got to have receipts. I'm not sure that a blanket charge of equivalent to living wage will do it in some cases. And also there's a very big discrepancy between the allowance for the looking after, caring for an elderly person or to a child. And I'd quite like to see the carer's allowance a bit more policy around that. So that, because it's what's really difficult is if you are not in the habit of buying care for either an elderly person or a child, it's really difficult to just do it out of the blue for the occasional meeting or even for a regular meeting. Whereas if you're on an irregular agreement for the rest of the week, it's a whole different matter. So I'd quite like that to be looked at again, if we're going to indeed review it at all.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, this report itself highlights why this is important. So top of page 90, people are encouraged to stand. It's important people are encouraged to stand for election, that their service to the community is retained. I've got a number of questions about the report, and there's a number of gaps. Although I'm concerned about passing something to full council where members are being invited for a pay hike based on something where there's such a number of gaps. One of them, and perhaps an inconsistency that strikes me, is in respect of the leader's pay. Far be it from me to be advocating for the pay of the leader of the Liberal Democrats, but actually, kind of politics aside, it's an important role. It's the leader of the council. This report, having said that it's an evidence-based and thorough review, particularly important because the last review was light touch, in respect of the leader's special responsibility allowance, says the panel felt the allowance was set too low compared to other comparator authorities, therefore proposed two-stage increases over 2 years up to 2027. Well, by the time we get to 2027, the grand effect of that increase, according to the SIPFA comparator, is that Portsmouth City Council would continue to pay the least for the position of leader. So if the idea behind that was to change that because it was too low, because it left them at the bottom of the comparator table, it leaves them there. So what's the point? I've got a number of other questions. Is there an opportunity to submit some of that in writing for, if this was to be, is it?
James, would you be able to answer that?
It could be. Obviously, the delay caused would mean it wouldn't factor into budget setting for next year. So if something was agreed after the budget's been agreed, which is likely by the time the panel have looked at it, it's been through gas and then gone to council again, we'd need to find an in-year budget saving or need to somehow fund it outside of budget.
Councillor Simpson.
As I say, you could do an emergency meeting though, couldn't you, if it was to be considered before?
How long? It depends on how long it took.
Mine's a little bit more direct. I had a little bit of I wrote something up. I mean, even though Council Manager was taking some of my thunder, but I think it's because we're kind of aligned on the same mindset. I mean, firstly, I just want to state, when I first saw this on the agenda, my first reaction was that I'm against any increase. Considering, as it stands today, we are in a cost of living crisis, and this is completely inappropriate. However, because the report and recommendations are only every 4 years, and not just considering today and current, my view is that if elected councillors are supported, which was mentioned here, better, they may not consider obtaining a supplementary job and therefore can focus fully on the role. Not to say that councillors don't manage it already, but I just thought it was really important to point that out. So therefore, I propose not to approve the recommendation and send the report back to the IRP for reconsideration of proposals for the following reasons. If you could pass that down, that'd be lovely. So number one, the SEE benchmarking data isn't relevant comparison data and should be given less weight in the report considerations because, one, Portsmouth's population is roughly 208,000, whereas some of the comparable councils have significantly low population representation and dramatically lower revenue income. Also that, and as mentioned before, greater weight shouldn't be placed with this data. Should be placed more on the CIPFA benchmarking data as it's defined that our nearest neighbour from a statistical and comparable point of view. Number two, it is noted that even if the current recommendation are approved, that the Portsmouth will still fall at the bottom remuneration value in comparison to the CIPFA benchmarking. To reconsider the position of the leader and cabinet members multipliers based on the average compensation for the CIPFA benchmarking data. Number four, that performance of the councils that are being compared to is research and noted in comparison to ours. Number five, that the role of licensing chair may have not been fully considered by the IRP panel. Licensed chairs do a large amount of work outside formal meetings, including trade meetings, consultation meetings, legal briefings, policy meetings, visits to licensed trades on evenings and weekends. With this in mind. Number six, that the role of licensed chair should remain as identical multiplier to that of the planning chair. Number seven, notes that the scrutiny chair's multiplier should be considered to align with the EC and gas chair positions. If not, then a reason must be presented to not align. I must add that a lot of scrutiny chairs do a lot of meetings outside before those meetings, so we don't just turn up and the officers have done all the work for us. There's a lot of relationship building with officers and also witnesses outside. 8, to note that the Lord Mayor position is effectively a full-time role and should be compensated with the consideration in line at least with national minimum wage. Number 9, ask the IRP to consider adding point 20 to read, councillors have access to venue hire allowance scheme for wards where there isn't a pre-existing free council-owned community space to hold resident ward surgeries. Allowance claimable up to the value of £20 per councillor per month. And because Judith already spoke before me, I want to add Judith's points as well onto that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe I will need a seconder.
So the report in the chair's preface says, if you wish to discuss any part of the report, I would be happy to do so. So I think my question is, how do we do that? And on that basis, I'm happy to second the proposal.
In order to do that, it could be referred back, but noting the delay that would be incurred and the fact that we are making a recommendation on the full council, and it's full council which determines it, and any amendment that councillors wish to put forward can be considered and voted upon at the full council meeting. I can't speak on behalf of the independent panel, as they are obviously an independent panel. I do know that they were quite happy with the report and they were happy to submit it on to full council as they've agreed it in its current form. So councillors could go back to them as they wish, but just to say they are quite happy with the report as drafted.
Just to go back to point one, though, I think that was the point was that they were using not correct benchmarking data with the SEE, and when it should have really been solely in the CIPFA. So that's kind of the concern, really, is that they're like judging it on, I wouldn't say poor data, but data that's not appropriate.
In terms of the data set, be noted that all previous PCC reports have been based solely on South East employers' data. This year they decided to look at the CIPFA data as well to give an additional data set, and it's quite common practice for local authorities in the South East of England to look at the SEE data, as similar data sets across the country would also be similarly used for benchmarking. And when they looked at the SEE data, obviously there's a lot of smaller districts and boroughs. They didn't give much weight to them because that's not comparable to Portsmouth City Council as a big unitary. So they gave more weight to the unitary. But as you've seen from the report, there's quite a difference in the local unitaries versus the national CIPFA nearest neighbours. So obviously not able to speak on behalf of the panel's independent judgment themselves, but having sat in the meetings, I know they weighted both of them sort of with each other, so they gave weight to the CIPFA, weight to the comparable South East employers data, also mindful of the public purse as well, informing their final conclusions.
Who set the terms of reference for the independent panel?
The panel themselves did, and they decided to look at the whole scheme, which is quite a big task. In previous years, it's normally been a part, but they have noted that the whole scheme in its entirety has not been looked at for a long time, which is why they looked at the whole scheme.
Is there anything to stop the panel putting exactly the same report in and saying they're still happy with it?
Not at all. No. I mean, as an independent panel, they will put forward their independent view, which is what they have done in this instance. So this committee can amend the recommendations as it sees fit to put onto full council, and full council members can put forward any amendments that they so wish, be it to retain the current scheme or to come up with a different sort of scheme, accept some part of it but not all of it. And I would suggest, so long as there's a rationale behind doing that, there will be perfectly valid amendments for members to vote on at the full council meeting and arrive at the scheme of allowances.
Councillor Smythe?
I can't imagine any sensible politician wanting a wrangle over this particular matter, as it's to do with our alliance. We've all got an interest in this. We didn't declare it, but we have. And I can't imagine the leader of the council or leader of any of the groups wanting this to take up valuable time in a full council meeting. But I do wonder if there is a desire for the panel ought to be asked what they feel about reconsidering, and they may say yes or they may say no. But also I wondered if there's any reason why they can't do it quick enough for us to turn it round pretty quickly so that it can be reflected in budget.
In order to be turned around quickly, the panel will obviously need to reconvene to take on board any points that Gas Committee put forward to them. They would then need to come to another Gas Committee and then go on to full council. The full council agenda is being published not next Monday, but the Monday after next. So in order to get the statutory deadlines for convening this meeting, getting the agenda out in time, having the panel having considered and come up with any alternative recommendations if it so wishes, or it may just stick to the recommendations it has already, I think that would be a very tall order to get done in time for December Council, unless
we're having a January
unless we're looking to put a special council meeting in to consider this one item in advance of the budget meeting.
Councillor Gardner.
The report says if you wish to discuss any part of the report, I will be happy to do so, so that there isn't going to be a chance to discuss any elements of the report because of the timetable.
I think it would be very difficult if it remain onto the full council in December timetable. If it's pushed back to a future council meeting, that could happen, but then the recommendations won't be able to be factored into setting the budget accurately, so it would come after the budget, which may cause its own complications.
Richards. Sorry.
Sorry. Sorry. I just wanted to add, I mean, because we mentioned that we always use the SE benchmarking data, but could it just be that it was wrong to do so in the first place, and we should have actually used the CIPFA? And also to add, and this is not the first time it's happened, because I remember this happening in licensing as well, where essentially we were given this this actual chair's note here on the 20th of October, and it's exactly a month later that we're now talking about it. We've lost a month talking about it, and now we have been told we have to make this decision now, and we're going to run out of time, we're going to miss this deadline. And for me, I feel this is quite important to get right, because it's only every 4 years. So this would be where, like, you would have an emergency meeting to discuss this specifically. And I just can't, what Judith was talking about the year, having a year behind. I'm like, well, we're a month behind on this as well. Because what's the point of adding, if you wish to discuss any part of the report, I'm happy to do so. And it's the 28th of October, and now it's the 27th of November.
I don't think...
Richards.
Sorry, thank you. I just wanted to add, because obviously it's an important item that's being discussed here, and want you to have the time to make sure that you have the time to review the recommendations, the underlying principles, and get your recommendations in a shape that you're comfortable to proceed with. In terms of the budget setting process, we can obviously work in the background to understand where you are with this process, and I can liaise with Chris to make sure we make some provision alongside that, so that it doesn't affect, you can still proceed with your discussions and decisions, and we could build that into the process, which is currently ongoing, as you know, anyway. So so if that helps, take the budget pressure out of it, focus on getting the decision right, and we can factor it in the background to make sure we've got some contingency or provision set aside.
Thank you.
A couple of points that may be pertinent. The council, we legally need to have a new scheme in place for the 1st of April next year. Whilst we are legally obliged, because we index link our allowances, to hold an independent remuneration panel every 4 years, there's nothing to prohibit us holding reviews more frequently. We simply, that is the long stop. We have to do it every 4 years, and that's what we do. There's nothing to stop an interim proposal being put forward and then asking the independent panel to look again at specific elements, to then put forward a further report, which could even be within the same year as well. That would be fine as well. So that's another option as well that is on the table. So I appreciate, it's sort of stated it's every 4 years. We have to do it every 4 years, but we can do it. We could do it every 3 months if we so wanted, but we are legally obliged to do it every 4 years. So there is an option there as well if that assists.
How would we put that into the report to council? Would that be the report, this is just an interim report and will be looked at again?
Without wanting to suggest what an amendment might look like, but it would be to agree whatever proposals is put forward in said amendment, whether it's retain our existing scheme in the interim, whether it's accept the panel's scheme in the interim, or accept another scheme in the interim, but then to formally request that the panel looks at this matter again and brings the matter back before council. You may wish to put a timeline in there, or just to consider at the earliest opportunity something like that.
Councillor Brown.
Chair, do we have any reason, to our knowledge, why there isn't a representative from the independent panel at this meeting to answer questions? And can we get some assurance that if we ever do get future reports from them, someone who was actually involved in writing the reports comes to answer our questions?
Yeah, in terms historically, the chair will present at the full council meeting. They typically haven't come to the gas committees previously, but that may be something that we could look at going forwards if that would be useful. So it's not something that has happened before, but we can change convention.
I think it would be useful because there have been a lot of questions today. It would have been useful today.
Yeah, I was going to add. I'm still going to put my proposal on the table, irrelevant. But yes, maybe the chair of the IRP would be really helpful to have here. Stuart beat me to it.
Members, any other questions or comments? Councillor Brown.
probably with a slight declaration of interest as the current chair of the Employment Committee. Obviously, I just wanted to discuss a slight thing on item 7 on your proposal, Russell. The main difference between a scrutiny chair and the chairs of Employment and Gas is that scrutiny panels are not decision-making committees, whereas both the Employment and Governance and Audit committees do have some limited decision-making authority. With employment, it's particularly when it comes to the appointment of director-level positions of staff, and obviously with governance and audit, you're familiar with it. Now, this may not necessarily be a good reason to have them different. I'm open to discussion around that, but that's probably the reason why they don't currently align, I would imagine. I think technically under the Constitution, scrutiny, EC and Gas are both considered as regulatory committees. Is that correct, James? Yeah. So they have those decision-making and regulatory powers that scrutiny committees don't.
Well, maybe I'd amend that. It's basically saying align it with CIPFA benchmarking data as well, basing it on what our neighbours have and going closer to that then, instead of having it in complete comparison or aligning with the EC and Gas chair positions. Yeah.
So it looks like we've got a couple of options. We either kick it back to the panel again, or, as James has suggested, we put this report forward to full council on the agreement that it's an interim report, and then it'll be looked at again with plenty of time before the next budget setting.
The only thing full council needs to do is before April this year, it needs to have agreed something. Otherwise, we wouldn't have met our legal obligations in order to review and enact a new scheme within 4 years of the previous scheme. So that's the only thing that we need to be mindful of.
Councillor Smythe?
If we take the pressure on the budget setting deadlines, then we would have a further council meeting in February to do something if we wanted to. I would still say that...
be March, I think. Yeah. Councillor Simpson?
As stated, I'm happy to put due to points on my proposed.
That penalises mostly.
So we'd need a formal amendment to the report, so proposed and seconded, with specific things that we require from the panel.
So as a suggestion, if it helps members, I would suggest that the amended recommendation would be along the lines of the Governance Audit Standards Committee is not satisfied with the way in which Independent Remuneration Panel undertook the review, and then we go on to what you kindly forwarded. Councillor Simpson proposes not to approve the recommendations and send the report back to the Independent Remuneration Panel for reconsideration for the following reasons. Now, during debate, there's been a couple of alterations to what you have circulated, so I think we just need to be really clear on what's being proposed, and we have a proposer and a seconder for that as amended.
I believe it was only number 7, because we were aligning it with EC and gas, and what we've actually said is note that the scrutiny chair's multiplier should be considered in alignment with the CIP FA benchmarking data instead.
Probably that scrutiny chairs and chairs of EC and gas.
Yeah,
for sure. Relevant positions.
Yeah, happy to put both.
It could be that they're all on the level. It could be that there's some stratification.
Yeah. Judith's going to have to remind us of her points as well in detail.
There's a review of the carers allowance, I think, wasn't it? Judith, microphone.
I was going to propose that the carers allowance section is it's fine, it's good as guidance, but it needs to be more tailor-made to individual circumstances. I can imagine having, perhaps paying 15 quid an hour, and this is at 12, and you think, oh, this is just penalising me as a mother again. And if you've already get an arrangement with somebody that the child likes, you want to ask them to come back. You don't want to scour the market for somebody else who'll do it at 12 quid an hour. It's more, and I don't think this is very often used, is it?
So I'm aware currently we have 4 members who have used it, one of whom uses it quite regularly.
Yes. So I think perhaps we ought to ask them what suits them best.
Councillor Gardner.
Sure as anything, women that it's affecting most.
If we're going to go back and look at this with proper questions, can't we just reserve the position in terms of what the issues are? Because part of the issue is that we want to be able to ask questions. I thought the plan was to have somebody from the board here. Do we need to start drilling down into the detail now? If we're going to come back to this, why don't we come back to it and do it properly and just have some wording to the effect that there's gaps that members aren't happy with?
I don't wish to muddy waters further. But as a long stop, just to ensure that we don't inadvertently go past the 1st of April deadline by which something needs to have been agreed, we could have something along the lines that you have proposed, Councillor Gardner. We don't yet have a second, I don't believe, for...
I think it's Councillor Gardner's request for a meeting with member of the panel.
Presumably you could call another short meeting of this group pretty quickly, and those of us who could come, and those who couldn't.
How quickly could that be arranged?
If we can agree a date fairly quickly, then we'd obviously need to give 5 clear working days notice that this meeting's being held, and then we could hold the meeting. So I think whatever happens, it's not going to be going to December Council by the looks of it. But given our Deputy 151 Officer's helpful advice in respect of budget setting, that's perhaps not the most critical thing. We could agree it after the budget has been agreed, and there would be potential for headroom for that to, for want of a better word, for that to be incorporated. So then the long stop becomes this 1st of April date by which a decision needs to have been made, even in interim. So my only suggestion would be that we aim to get that done, but perhaps to put something in just to say, if this hasn't happened by the 1st of April, to retain the current scheme in the interim. That way we can't go past the 1st of April not having met our legal obligations. So we could put something in as a long stop about that as well.
Chair, presumably some of us could meet very quickly.
Yes, it would
Probably
depend
doesn't
on
require
members of the
everybody.
independent panel. Yeah.
But then we could get to the February meeting
So if we find out from the members of the panel when they could meet. Would this report appearing at the same meeting as the budget cause any issues?
I'm not aware of any.
So I think at the moment the proposal is to amend the current report with the questions for the panel, and then try and arrange a meeting with members of the panel so that we can discuss the questions we have and the follow-up report. Is that okay?
This is my proposal, isn't it? Because we haven't had a seconder yet. I haven't had a seconder, so I know there was a few considerations, but I think as we've included everything anyway, that would work.
Is there a seconder for this proposal? Richard?
Yeah, so can I just say I will follow up with James after this meeting to ensure that the meetings and the agendas align appropriately to ensure that this is reflected in accordance with the necessary steps we need for the full council meetings. And if there's any problems, we'll let you know.
Councillor Gardner, are your proposals included in Councillor Simpson's amendment or additional or a different one?
This is a question I've got. Do we need at this stage to list out the questions we've got? Because we're going to be a long time while we go through the report and exhaustively list all the questions. Can't we say that we've got more questions, but there's a process for coming back and putting those down in detail? Just I'm cautious about seconding something that actually I've got my own extra bits to add on. The list is either exhaustive and contains everything we've got to ask questions about, or it's a widely drafted term that says we will either ask somebody some more questions or by a certain date submit the questions. Are we committed at this stage to setting out what it is we want more information about?
No. It's useful to obviously give the panel chair some guidance or a steer in advance, but we don't need to specifically do that right now, because I think that's maybe what caused a bit of confusion. There may be some thoughts after the meeting of additional considerations. So,
where we've got questions for officers, we don't submit them in advance, do we, in an amended note? We come up with the questions at the time, don't we?
You do, although it might be useful for the independent panel chair before they come along, just to have a feel for the matters to be considered.
Yeah. We could do that in writing in advance, though, presumably?
Yeah, you could certainly give them a heads up in advance as to what it is.
This is some of the questions that might be answered, but there might be more.
So we could end up with a resolution that the Governance Audit Standards Committee confirms that it's not satisfied with the way that the panel took the review, and then add something on the end of that without putting everything down, to put something down that to request that a further Governance Audit Standards Committee meeting be held to discuss concerns raised with the independent panel. But just a reminder that any amendments should be written down, circulated to the chair. Sorry, my mic went off. If any member wishes to make a proposal, it should be done in that way, just to avoid any ambiguity about what's being agreed.
So the first step is to get something in writing. Now.
Yes, so we get something in writing now.
Yes.
In terms of a recommendation from this committee.
Yes.
then that will then go to the chair, and then the committee will be asked to vote upon it.
James, two things. Well, first is a question. Are the standing orders, as of July 2020, the most current version acknowledged by Council to be in effect?
Yes.
Lovely. I would like to move Standing Order 40E.
And what is Standing Order 40?
To refer or refer back to an item to a cabinet or to a committee, subject to a majority in the meeting, together with an explanation from the mover as to why the matter cannot be resolved.
And the reason is presumably the committee had a lot of questions to ask the report authors.
So we're not approving recommendation. That's basically
No,
the crux.
we're not approving it, we're not satisfied, and we request that it goes back to the authors and that we have a meeting with the authors.
Could we have a recommendation that says that the GASC thanks the independent panel for their work and has a few questions about some of the details before forwarding that to full council for implementation? I'd be willing to second that. I'm not willing to second anything that has all the details on Councillor Simpson's list, because
No, this essentially should form the basis of the amendment.
Yeah.
Members,
But I don't want to lose the opportunity.
there are a lot of officers who have already given their reports. We can adjourn while we discuss what to write and what to put forward. So 15 minutes, half an hour. Right, it's 6:27. We're going to adjourn for half an hour. Thank you. 15 minutes then. Based on what's gone on so far, half an hour won't be enough. Right, thank you everyone. We're back on. I've received an amendment from Councillor Simpson, and the amendment reads, this is a report that recommends the increase in members' allowance, so needs to have careful consideration. We would firstly like to thank the IRP for their time and hard work of this recommendation. Under Standing Order 40p, I propose that the recommendation be deferred until the 5th of February 2025 gas meeting to enable members at that gas meeting, as offered by the IRP, to discuss the report and ask questions in person. So, Russell, are you happy to propose that?
I propose. Happy.
Your seconder?
Seconded.
Thank you. So, the matter is now open for debate. Does anyone have anything further to say? Right, we need a show of hands. Is everyone happy with that? There we go. So that's carried. Thank you. That's the end of that agenda item. Luckily, we've got 2 more to go. Agenda item 10, compliance with gifts and hospitality register. Helen Dickerson, Deputy City Solicitor, present to introduce the item. Members have received and read the report. Is there anything that you particularly wish to highlight to the committee?
No, the information is contained within the report. It's an annual report. The policy was last reviewed in August 2020. It details within the report those gifts and the hospitality items that are within policy, and therefore under £25 for most of the Directorate in Adult Social Care is £5. And those over £25 limit, which are outside the policy, there were 11 in total, and only 3 of those were accepted, and there is rationale behind those prepared in the report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Councillor Smythe?
I think it's a great report and quite reassuring. It's reassuring. I think it looks like it's controlling, that sort of corruption which we don't want. Well done. That's great. I find some of the under £5 claims when it's a whole box of chocolates probably a bit outdated, really. I did have a little look in a supermarket, and I can't see many boxes of chocolates for under £5. Can we just ask you to have a look at that again? Because I think £5 on the other hand is a good limit for, particularly if it's somebody. We had similar dilemmas in the housing association I worked, and particularly if it's somebody, on limited means who's getting a personal care. It's a tricky one. So I understand the difficulties of it, but I think you should just actually look at it again. Or you cannot find a box of chocolates for under £5, that very small one occasionally. The rationale behind the adult social care obviously is because the clientele is more vulnerable, and therefore it's the need to show that there isn't any fraud, bribery, corruption and all of those things. But obviously the committee is to consider whether they wish to make any recommendations for change, and you are able to consider that.
Members, would you like to formally propose that we raise that limit, or? Microphone, Judith.
I don't know what to suggest. Otherwise I would have suggested it. I mean, maybe it's something that we should just say the committee asked for thank for all the work done and were reassured by the system, but asked for a review of the
lower limits, thresholds. Microphone.
Find very few boxes of chocolates for under £5. The recording of it, however, is only in relation to that. It's not necessarily that it's not being accepted if it's under a £5. It's just the actual recording of that information of it. And so, whilst that is obviously quite a substantial list, there are quite a number of officers who record and provide information regarding much lower item gifts. And so, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. accept it and admire the report, but I do just have a credibility gap when it comes to all these boxes of chocolates for under a fiver. It's like, you know, that when the process is being managed, people are just saying, oh, it's a box of chocolates, so we always put under a fiver. Very few that actually are under a fiver.
Thank you. Any members, any other questions, comments? So, members, it's recommended that the committee consider whether or not to make any recommendations for change, which I think you take on board what Judith said. And in the absence of any changes, the report is noted. Members, is the report noted? Yes. Thank you. Right. Item 11, exclusion of press and public. Members, the appendices to agenda item 9, procurement management information, contain exempt information as defined in part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972.
There was one other thing on page, 137. There's a date of a...
We've moved on now.
Well, there's a gift that's been received on the 1st of February 2025, that's all.
Okay. Maybe they're planning on giving it. Members, I propose that we consider the non-exempt report in open session and only move into the exempt session if members wish to discuss the detail contained within the exempt appendices. I think everyone's got a copy of the exempt appendices. Is the committee happy with this approach? Yes. Thank you. Procurement management information. Richard Locke, Procurement Manager, is in attendance to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. All the information is in the report. There's no further updates, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And just to remind members that we're in open session and therefore we will only be considering the report at this stage, not the exempt appendices. Once the report has been considered, I shall ask members if they wish to discuss any of the detail contained within the exempt appendices. If so, I shall at that stage propose that we enter exempt session. Members, any questions for Richard? None. That's what I was waiting for, wasn't it? Thank you. Thank you, members. That concludes the business on the agenda for this meeting. Thank you for your attendance, and we'll close the meeting at 18:56.